Well, it's been quite a week here in Manitoba. We're remembering the Honourable Justice Murray Sinclair, while we also try to make sense of what the election of Donald Trump as U.S. president could mean for our province. Premier Wab Kinew is in studio now for our monthly interview. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, we're glad to have you. So let's start with the U.S. election and the victory of Donald Trump. How do you think his presidency might impact Manitobans?
Well, we've been getting ready for this for quite some time. Like even going back before the election, we appointed Gary Dewar as our advisor on U.S. trade, and he's a huge asset for our province. Obviously, Manitobans know him very well from his time as being a very successful premier, but he was also the ambassador to the United States of America, and so he's got all these deep connections with people in Congress, people at the state level, influencers, and people in the business community in the States. So, thought leaders as well. So he's been a great person on the strategy side. We've also been working hard with the business community, with labor, with community groups here to put like a common Team Manitoba foot forward to the U.S. and to really make that case that Manitoba has what America needs. So we've got critical minerals, we've got energy that we export to the U.S. We've got a great ag industry and manufacturing. And the approach that we're going to take with a new Trump administration is to say that trade with Manitoba is good for the U.S. It's good for jobs in the U.S. It's good for jobs here in Manitoba. So let's strengthen this relationship. And I think the one area where Manitoba and Canada has a real value proposition that few countries around the world can match is on the question of security. We are America's closest ally. We are, this trusted national security partner, Arctic security presence that we can offer to the States. And so really making an argument in America's best interest, but of course it always reflects our values as Canadians and just upholding those fundamental Canadian values like healthcare for everybody and respect for human rights.
Yeah, so different but partners. We're going to try to maintain that tack. But, during his campaign, Trump said he plans to impose a 10% tariff on all imports. And a Canadian Chamber of Commerce report released last month suggested those tariffs would shrink the Canadian economy by as much as $30 billion a year. I mean, what might that mean for us here in Manitoba? I know we have a plan for the critical minerals, but, if there's a tariff, doesn't that kind of affect the plan?
Well, that's why we're making that case to the U.S. So, for instance, just to talk about critical minerals, when you talk about a Trump administration, you talk about Republicans in Congress. For us, we're going to be talking about critical minerals in terms of the defense industry, in terms of the energy industry. So these are the raw materials that are needed to look after America's security interests, our common security interests across NATO and across North America. And really here in Manitoba, we can bring these to market with more respect for the environment, with better respect for labor rights, for human rights than pretty much any other country in the world. And so as America seeks to strengthen its security, and we know that security, including border security, will be a big priority for this administration, we're going to make that argument that having a really close trading relationship, an integrated supply chain, being able to work together as good friends and allies is going to be the best way for America to prosper in the future. And then, of course, from our perspective, that's Manitoba jobs. That's food on the table for people here in the province and making sure that as hopefully we're starting to turn the corner on this cost of living period, that we're going to keep the economy moving in a good way.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on critical minerals in Manitoba, maybe, being mined with human rights in mind and better environmental standards. But I don't think those are high priorities for Donald Trump. He's really cracking down on that idea of a tariff. I mean, do you think he's going to see things the same way?
Well, that's why we've been working together, both here in Manitoba with the business leadership and, the community groups who traveled with us to D.C. along with labor leaders. But we're also working together as premiers. And I can tell you that I've, been in contact with, my colleagues in the other provinces and territories. And over the course of this past year, getting ready for a conversation about the trade deal, USMCA, getting ready for a new administration in the U.S., whichever way it was going to go, we've been building those relationships. So each of us as premiers of the provinces and territories have those relationships in the U.S. Now we see that a certain side of the aisle is going to have, more of the decision making. we're going back to those relationships, whether it's in Congress, whether it's at the state level, whether it's people who could potentially form, cabinet roles or others in this new Trump administration. And we're just, again, going back and making that case. Trade with Manitoba, trade with Canada is good for you. And of course, from our perspective, we're going to stand up for your jobs and do it in a way that always upholds our values as Manitobans and Canadians.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on like the different individual states. We also have relationships with governors and governments at that level. How do you think the tariffs and the trade relationship will be affected by the new presidency?
Well, we know that trade works best when it's mutually beneficial, meaning from our perspective, we want the good jobs here. We want the cost of living to be more affordable here. We want the average family here in Manitoba to keep their head above water. And obviously, the United States of America is going to be looking after their own interests. And I really do think there's a possibility to build a win-win, but it won't happen by accident. We're going to have to be vocal. We're going to have to be present. We're going to have to be there on the ag industry, making the case for our producers, on mining, making the case about how that advances our shared security interests, making the case on all these really important sectors of our economy. And so, we were there in the state capital, St. Paul, for Minnesota earlier this fall, strengthening those relationships. When we were in D.C., we met Kelly Armstrong, who has now been elected the governor of North Dakota. We worked with the former governor, Governor Burgum, on some of the challenges we had with the pipeline shutdown earlier this year. So we've got those really strong trade relationships too, and it's really just going to take like an all hands on deck and all paths towards getting to that goal kind of approach. So whether it's myself and the fellow premiers, whether it's working with our federal government, now is just a really important time for us to stand up for Manitoba and Canada with this new American administration.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure, though, there's still producers here in Manitoba who are concerned a 10% tariff. I mean, what would you say to those who are worried about that, effect on their bottom line?
Well, I think we have a window of opportunity right now to make the case that having a strong ag industry relationship between Manitoba and North Dakota, Manitoba and South Dakota, Minnesota, Nebraska, and so on is really, really good for both producers on both sides of the border. And of course, if American producers want to be competitive and have a good income coming in, then there needs to be lower input costs for them. And of course, they're getting a lot of their implements and machinery, and so in some cases, we have an integrated supply chain with some of the ag products that we're bringing to market. So just having that relationship really strong and well understood, I think that the voices from the Midwestern ag sector are going to have a lot of influence in this new incoming Trump administration. And so the good relationships that we have there will benefit them, but also benefit Manitoba producers.
Okay, to be continued as the negotiations carry on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now to the Honourable Justice Murray Sinclair. You know him since you were a child. How would you describe your relationship with him?
Yeah, I mean, Murray is somebody, I went to preschool with his kids. And so, I was there with them last night. And my heart really goes out to him because he was such a wonderful person. And while we know him in public as the one who did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, he was, this well-respected judge and thought leader and inspired so many Canadians. For him, he was always a family man first and foremost. And, the ability for him to raise his kids to be thoughtful, loving, well people who are also very grounded in who they are as Anishinaabe people, I think is a real testament to who he was. And so my heart, it really goes out to them first and foremost right now. And I think, just sitting with them and reflecting on it over the course of the week, I think one of the things that I think a lot of us are really hit hard by losing Murray, and I mean this, going across the country, is that there was this tremendous hope that he helped to unleash during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, during the follow-up period when business and schools and universities and communities churches were all coming together, faith groups of all denominations were coming together to talk about the calls to action and move forward. And I think we're mourning a great friend and relative and a great Canadian, but I think part of us is also mourning that maybe we're losing that sense of hope that he inspired in each and every one of us. But I just want to, reflect on that and say that, like, of course, that hope still continues. That hope is still here with us. And I think one of the really important ways for us to honor his legacy is by keeping that project going, keeping the work of the calls to action and Every Child Matters and Orange Shirt Day and working with business and, church and community and Indigenous, non-Indigenous to just build up this country that we love so much.
And how can we, as Manitobans, step up and honor that legacy and keep that hope going?
Well, I think that, Murray was always big on education, and there's so many great quotes about education. And what I would encourage, the folks listening today to reflect on is like, listen, teachers have been leading that. Absolutely. That is about the school system and the post-secondaries doing a lot of heavy lifting. But education is also lifelong learning, I would say. And I know that Murray was a big believer in this. And so when we see companies stepping up to honor Orange Shirt Day or to have professional learning days inside their organizations, when we see faith groups and different congregations committing both to learn but also to engage their spiritual practice with an eye towards advancing reconciliation, when you just have the local community club that acknowledges, the traditional territories and Indigenous nations when they start their public events. I think all of these things help to educate all of us in the biggest sense of the word, which is that lifelong learning sense of the word. And I think if we all keep our minds open and our hearts open to continuing that project of learning about one another, learning about the true history, and building respectful relationships, as Murray Sinclair would always say, I think that's a wonderful way to honor his legacy, but perhaps most importantly, to stay true to what he had in mind for this province and for this country.
Are there ways that Murray Sinclair inspired you and put you on this path to being premier? You touched on education, but how else has he influenced you?
Like literally every step of the way, he was there through the most challenging moments to like the biggest successes that we've seen. Like he presided over our swearing-in ceremony. He administered the oaths of office to all the cabinet ministers in Manitoba right now. He swore me in as the 25th Premier of Manitoba. And, he told the national newspaper of record, the Globe and Mail, he told them, I've known Wab Kinew since he was in diapers. This is what one of the journalists was telling me this week. And so for him to be there from that time, like decades ago, and then be there for the swearing in, it just shows like this indelible, inextricable link and like the tremendous support. So, I mean, I have so much love and admiration for his kids. I really, really mourn the loss of their father with them. And at the same time, I'm also reflecting on the fact that this person who was the guide for me and my team, who was the rock, who was the source of advice, he's not going to be there in the same way with us anymore. And so now, much as you do many times when you're grieving somebody that you love, somebody that you cared about, it's about thinking about this next stage of your life where they're still here in our hearts and in our minds, but how are we going to go through the day-to-day without them being present in that same immediate sense that they once were.
How does it make you feel, that hole right now? I mean, he was so important to you.
Oh, yeah. Like, I'm really torn up about it, and so many people that I work with, so many people that I'm just connected to in a broader sense are really torn up about it. But, sitting with the family these many weeks and, being there with them again last night, both his kids and grandkids, but also more extended family, I just think like now is the time for that healing journey to move forward in a good way. So we are, heartbroken. We're sad for the relatives. We're contemplating what is this next stage of our country's history going to be like, having benefited from his presence, but not able to count on his continued interventions the way that we have these past few years. I just really, it's just a mix of heartbreak and gratitude. And that bittersweet feeling is, among other things, what makes life worth living. And so I think as much as we mourn this giant who walked amongst us, I think we're also just very, very grateful and thankful for having been able to walk in his footsteps.
Mm-hmm. And so just in our last minute here, Premier, I mean, let's go back to that swearing-in ceremony and his speech. What have his words meant to you during your time as Premier so far?
Well, he gave advice on how to run a government. He said you have to learn to love the people even if they don't love you, which is do the right thing even if it isn't popular. Serve the people even if they're giving you a hard time, so to speak. And hey, the people of Manitoba have been great to us. Open minds, open hearts since we were sworn in. But what I've reflected on these past days and weeks is that was actually advice on how to live your life as a person too. Learn to love the people around you, even if they're not reciprocating. Learn to love your kids and family most of all, even if family life has its ups and downs. And just try to be that kind, gentle person that we saw in Murray.
A good thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today, Premier.
Yeah, thanks for having the time. And I encourage people to come to the public memorial on Sunday.
Okay. Thank you. We'll have more details on that to come. Wab Kinew is the Premier of Manitoba, and he'll be back for our next interview in December. If you have any thoughts on our conversation, please call our listener line. That number is 204-788-3205.